Blessings, everyone. This is Reverend Afrin with the Four Pillars Proto-Temple. So I'm coming to you tonight because I wanted to talk about Wiccan ritual. And I know this is something that a lot of people talk about. You find it in every single book on Wicca. And this is something that I really didn't want to talk about because it's something that's been discussed so often. But I'm finding a lot of my students are really becoming interested in Wiccan ritual and they want to know more about it. So I wanted to give them something a little more comprehensive for them to be able to get more information about it. So I have with me my Four Pillars book of rites and rituals, which is something that I wrote a couple of years ago. Just has some different rituals and stuff in it. So I'm going to use this information here to talk about some stuff. So, talking about Wiccan ritual. Now, Wiccan ritual is something that, in my opinion, didn't really develop organically. It's not something that we can trace back to our history and say, well, this is what the ancients did, and this is kind of why they did it, and this is why, it's kind of grown organically over time. It's definitely something that comes from ceremonial magic, and it comes from a lot of obviously, the writings of Gerald Gardner, Wiccan Ritual does. And a lot of people, I think, just kind of perform the rituals. Well, this is what they said in the book, or this is what the manual says to do, without realizing why they're doing the rituals. What's the point of doing it the way that we're doing? So that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is talk about a Wiccan ritual and kind of break it down into segments here. Now, obviously, my background is in the Correllian tradition. The Four Pillars Proto-Temple is a chartered organization within the Correllian tradition. So there is a little bit, be aware there is going to be a little bit of that in this video, but I would like to be as basic as possible in the video without being as specific to Correllianism or the ways of the Correllian tradition. So I also wrote a book called, or not a book, excuse me. I also wrote a ritual called the Four Pillars Devotional Ritual, which is a ritual that I wrote as a way for our members to get into a sort of repetitive ritual routine that would help them with their devotional practices, because it's so difficult sometimes to come up with a routine and things of that nature. Now, when I wrote the Four Pillars devotional ritual, I wrote it specifically for as sort of a meditative exercise. I wrote it mainly to be done by one person, but I wrote it as sort of a meditative exercise for people to do and kind of go through the motions, but being very mindful of why they're going through the motions. So I wrote a lot of commentary with the ritual, and I'm going to discuss a little bit of that here. Now, Wiccan ritual across the board is generally all the same. So you're going to find a lot of the same things regardless of the tradition. Now, the Correllian tradition is the only tradition that I know of that's actually separated the ritual officially into segments and explains each of the segments in turn. Now, I'm going to be a little more generic again, because of all of that, but I just want you to be want you to be aware of that. The components of Wiccan ritual are creating holy space through purification of the space, the altar, and the participants, casting the magic circle, invoking and calling the four quarters, and invoking the deities and the ancestors. Creating and performing an act of power, a consecration, a blessing, a form of magic, blessing and sharing of a sacred offering, thanking the ancestors, the deities, and thanking the quarters, and finally opening the magic circle. So, all Wiccan ritual has the same components. Firstly, there's a purification of some sort. You purify yourself, you purify the space. That's the very basic. And purification is something that doesn't really get talked a lot about in Wicca in general. I mean, it's something that you know you're supposed to do. Oh, I have to, purify my ritual tools before I can, consecrate them. Oh, I have to purify my ritual space before I use it. Oh, I have to purify my crystals and my candles and my other tools before I can use them. Okay, why? Why are we doing that? I have another video where I talked about purification and the idea of that sort of thing. So I won't repeat much of it here, but suffice to say that purification is very important. Now, different traditions have different ways of which they can purify, and we've talked about this again in the other video, but just be aware that generally speaking, purification comes in terms of personal purification, as well as purification of the ritual space and the altar and the ritual tools. So once everything's been purified, through generally, through the use of the four elements in some fashion. Now, as I said before, the Correllian tradition, they combine the elements together and they use those elements as a way of purifying the space. Now, in other traditions, they might use each individual element separately to purify the space. Regardless of how it's done, the element and holy water is normally created in some fashion and used to bless the participants and the ritual space. So once that is done and the space has been properly prepared, set up, decorated, blessed, that sort of thing, generally after that, then you would go to casting the magic circle. Now, the magic circle is a old practice, basically setting apart a sacred space. Now, that could be any number of ways based upon the tradition. And generally speaking, in Wicca, we do not mark the circle upon the ground or something like that. Maybe if you were on the beach and you wanted to do it, that'd be different. But generally speaking, they don't mark the circle as regular practice. They just simply use a ritual tool of some nature to cast the magic circle. Now, the magic circle has many different purposes. So, in many traditions, we understand that the magic circle is used as a protective circle. And it's not just a wall, it's a sphere. It's a sphere of energy that goes up and down, it goes all around the space. So, it's a sphere of energy. And that sphere is what protects the energy and the working. Now, that sphere is also used as an energetic construct. So we're creating a construct with our energy and we're using it as a barrier, as a ward. Now, many other traditions use, various other ways of doing the circle as well. They might visualize a hedge of flowers or a barrier of some sort, or simply just a sphere of blue or white light. So be aware of that, but it is a protective function as well. It's also used as sort of a bubble to contain the energy that is being raised, whether it be through chanting or meditation or dancing or what have you. We're creating a space to contain the energy and bottling it up until we're ready to release it to our goal. So that's another purpose of the circle. The magic circle also lends its energy. So it's sort of like a battery that we put energy into, and through the working, it continues to generate and give energy to the working. And that's very important. The magic circle is one of the most important aspects of the ritual, and it's meant to be done very, very specifically and focus very much on it. It's one of the most important rites of a Wiccan ritual, is being able to perform the magic circle. Now, after the magic circle has been cast, then it is time to call the quarters. And there are many different ways to call the quarters. There are many different ways to refer to the quarters, and each tradition is different. They might refer to them as watchtowers. They might refer to them as guardians. They might refer to them in Norse-inspired traditions. They might refer to them as the dwarves, because in the Norse tradition, of course, the dwarves are used to hold up the world, the four dwarves on the four corners. So, it could be any number of ways of doing that. Now, the elements are invoked during that time, and this is purely ceremonial practice. This is something that comes to us from ceremonial magic, something that has been passed down, and we might not necessarily understand the concept in modern Wicca. What's the big deal? Why are we calling the quarters? Is it really that important? I mean, we're not necessarily worshiping these quarters as gods, so why is it important that we invoke them? You know, it doesn't make any sense. Understand that casting the magic circle is creating a sacred space. It's creating a sort of demarcated cosmos, if you will, a sort of central focus. And we are within the center of that circle. And that circle is kind of like our purview. It's like our universe. Imagine it as a microcosm, a mini universe that we are working within. So when we cast the magic circle, we're creating our own mini universe. And then when we call the quarters, we are reenacting creation. So a lot of people are like, oh, you know, can we just get to the ritual already? Like, oh my god, here we go, gotta call quarters, what are we doing? You know, the whole purpose of calling quarters isn't just to get to the ritual, because if that were the case, like, just get over it, don't do it. The fact of the matter is that the purpose of calling the quarters is because we are recreating the cosmos. We are reliving the creation of the cosmos and the establishing of the four quarters as the four building blocks of the universe, as the four quarters that organize and intellectualize our universe. Of course, when we call the quarters, we use certain language that helps us to connect with those elements, with those energies, with those attributes as a way to understand and bring them into our lives and bring them into the circle. So it is very important. Now, I want to tell you a little secret. The language that we use doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You know, you could be speaking in a different language. You could be speaking in no language at all. There are rituals that are done purely with gestures and movement. The language that we use isn't important. Members of my proto-temple, when I've worked with them on performing ritual, they always get hung up on the language. They always get hooked and stumble, and then they feel foolish because they don't say the right thing. No, no, no. The language is meant to help you. You know, they use the word to enchant. Enchant, you know, means to speak. So an enchantment is a spoken incantation. You know, enchant, incant, incantation. It's the same word. It means to speak. So the incantation that we're saying, or the invocation that we're saying to ask these energies to come in, is meant to be a spoken thing. That's why it's called an invocation. But understand that the words that you're saying don't have meaning until you've connected with them. If you fumble through it and you say the wrong thing, who cares? Because the real purpose of calling the quarters, or any of the Wiccan ritual, is to use the words as a way to connect you with whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So, you know, when you call the quarters, hail to the guardian of the watchtower of the north, or hail to the sacred direction of the north element of earth, etc., etc., you're connecting with that element, with that energy, by speaking those words. But don't get hung up on the words, because the words aren't important. What's important is the visualization. What's important is the connection with the energies, with the attributes. It's not the language. Now, again, a lot of my students and a lot of the people that I perform ritual with, they get so hung up on the words, and they say the wrong words, and then they don't really say anything at all. And they're just like, oh, hi, Guardian of the Watchtower of the West, welcome. And they don't really say anything. So what exactly is the purpose of that? Not porpoise. Not the same thing. The purpose of that, you know, is it effective? Well, it's only effective if they are still continuing to use the visualization and, again, have that connection with the energies and the attributes that they're attempting to invite into the space. Now, if they've fumbled through it, they didn't speak anything, none of the words they said evoked any feeling or connection within them, then it didn't really do its job either, and it wasn't effective. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yes, in some ways you might need that language if you feel that that's what it takes in order to have an effective connection with whatever it is you're trying to do. Cast the circle, call the quarters, invoke the gods, whatever. Or, again, you could do it specifically out of visualization or specifically with gestures. That's really up to you. But understand that the words aren't always as important as we place emphasis on them. You know, we can make these beautiful poetic invocations of the quarters of the gods, and they're absolutely fantastic. But unless we are using those words as a trigger, as a key to really connect us with what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish, then they're pointless. So please keep that in mind. So when we cast the magic circle, we go clockwise around. It's called Sunwise. It's the direction of the sun. When the sun is going sunwise, it's moving forward in time, as it were. It is being creative. It is being, um, um, it is being creative. It is being progressive. It is being invoking. So we move clockwise always. In some traditions, they insist that you only move clockwise within a circle once the circle is cast, because by moving counterclockwise, you are undoing or unraveling the work that you're accomplishing. So keep that in mind, whatever you feel is appropriate. However, suffice to say that moving clockwise is always the best thing to do, especially when doing workings going forward. Now, so we cast the circle clockwise. When we call the quarters, we go clockwise. We begin in the east and we move clockwise around the circle. And as we do, we invoke each of the elements, all four of the elements. And then when you get back to the center of the circle after the quarters have been called, you begin the next rite of the ritual. The next rite of the ritual is invoking the god and goddess. Again, understanding that the words only help you so much. Saying the words with no understanding or meaning or reason for why you're saying it makes no difference, and it's not effective. Let's be honest. So, you invoke the god and goddess. Hail, great goddess, giver of life, grant us this blessing, come forward and be welcome within our circle, etc. Using those words as a key to connect you with the goddess in whatever aspect you're choosing to invoke. So if you need to tailor your words appropriately to help you to evoke or invoke, either way, because it's both really, the energies that you're trying to bring in, then that's what you need to do. If you're calling a particular goddess, then tailor your words appropriately. If you're calling a particular aspect of the goddess, you need to tailor your words appropriately. And so it can be very effective, but if you don't understand the language you're using, again, it's pointless. So, we invoke the god and goddess, and what I like to do in my temple is I have candles at the front of the statues, and I will light those candles as I'm saying the invocation to bring their energies into the circle, and also as a visual representation of their presence within the circle. So of course that's relatively self-explanatory. The next rite of the ritual is the central purpose of the ritual, the reason why the ritual is being performed in the first place. So that could be some sort of worship. It could be a full moon observance. It could be a new moon observance. It could be a holy high day observance. So that would be reserved for that part of the ritual. Now, there are many different ways to go about this aspect of the ritual. Of course, if it is a new moon or full moon, there might be specific things you might do all the time. Like, for instance, calling down the moon, or reading the charge of the goddess, or reading the charge of the god, or some variation on that. If it's the sort of philosophy I've always had on that has been, we don't perform magic on the holidays. So now, of course, that's kind of up for debate, because a lot of times in the holidays I might do some sort of a craft. Like for the previous holiday that we just had, I made a solar cross with Thor's rune written on them, and we made an invocation to Thor and an offering to Thor, and asked for his blessings upon those solar crosses for protection against inclement weather, and we gave them out. If you want to consider that to be form of magic, then I suppose, yes, we do perform magic on the holidays. But understanding that it's more of a blessings that we are asking for as opposed to magic that we're performing. So generally speaking, my temple uses magic only on the Esbats, not on Sabbats. On Sabbats is specifically reserved for worship and asking for blessings, etc., and offerings and things of that nature. So of course that this segment of the ritual would be for the actual purpose. And a lot of people, as I said, even people in my own temple, kind of use the first part of the ritual, casting the circle, calling the quarters, invoking the god and goddess or the ancestors or any other deity, as being kind of exposition, like, gotta trudge through it, gotta get through it, so we can get to the real meat of the ritual, which is, you know, the act of power, or the observance, or the worship, or whatever it is. And I think that's a really wrong way of going about it. Really, really wrong way of going about it. I mean, these things aren't just something we do because that's the way that Wiccan ritual works. I mean, no, it's something that is necessary for the purposes of what we're doing. Again, understand that these earlier segments of the ritual come from ceremonial magic. They're not necessarily something that's been organic, that's grown out. And I think in some ways that's causing a little bit of this separation, at least with some of the members that I've worked with and some of my students, because they're not really understanding, without really thinking about it, why we're doing the things that we're doing. Of course, recreating the cosmos and trying to encourage these energies and bring the balance and the stability of our lives and our ritual space, and all of that is important. Now, there, of course, been a lot of debate as to where these rituals actually came from. Now, of course, we know in this prevailing Wiccan story that Joe Gardner had found a lot of these rituals and had began to rewrite them in his Book of Shadows, which was then opened and passed down, and passed down. Now it's finally to us. Now, of course, there's also been evidence to suggest that, of course, Aleister Crowley and the OTO were influential in helping to form some of these rituals. And of course, looking back on that now, we can see evidence in some of these magical fraternities, like the Order of the Golden Dawn and the OTO and things of that nature, where these rituals have become very commonplace, and we can see how they've been borrowed. So whatever that means to you, I mean, if you want to believe that, well, they're pointless now they don't make any sense, and who cares? I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, just because they necessarily weren't organic and they didn't necessarily come from this spiritual, natural place, doesn't mean that they're any less important than they are now. And of course, realizing that this is what's been passed down to us, and this is what we should continue to do because of tradition and because of the efficacy of these practices, I think is enough to continue to do them. But understand why we're doing them, and understand that, you know, recreating the cosmos and invoking the four quarters and that sort of thing, it does come from ceremonial magic, and a lot of the tools that we use to do these rituals come from ceremonial magic. Of course, using the athame and using the wand, you know, for various reasons during ritual is, of course, coming from ceremonial magic, or the sword, or things of that nature. Now, stepping back just a moment, in some traditions, casting the circle is done by the athame. In other traditions, it's done by the wand. In the Correllian tradition, it's done by the athame. In some traditions, the athame or wand can be interchangeable. It appears to me that in traditions that are more ceremonial-based, they place more emphasis on the athame, whereas traditions that are more shamanic, or more green witch, I should say, more natural-based, folk, I should say as well, would be more associated with the staff, or the wand, or the rod, or something of that nature. So there is a slight variation on that, but it really depends on the tradition. In the Correllian tradition, they use both. They use the athame and the wand equally for different purposes, and they can be interchangeable, but normally they have their own reserved job. Now, the next rite after the actual act of power and the whole purpose of the ritual is the offering. And the offering can have two parts. Of course, you can make a libation, which is a liquid offering, and then you have a solid offering as well. So it really depends on your needs, and it really depends on how far you want to go with it. Some traditions will do one or the other. Of course, we know it's referred to often as the cakes and ale rite, or just simply as an offering. Now, the cakes and ale obviously makes a reference to having both liquid offering ale or wine and solid offering cakes, bread, some sort of solid offering as well. So keeping that in mind, I mean, I try to balance and do both in our temple, have one little bit of each. And now, one thing that I think is important that a lot of faiths do that's not explicitly said in Wicca is that we bless the chalice, we make the offerings, but understanding that when we are blessing the chalice and then we partake of the offerings, we are partaking of the blessings of the god and the goddess as they have blessed the contents of the offerings. And so be aware of that as well. We find this in many different cultures, and it's not something that's been really explicitly mentioned in Wicca, but it's something that I want everyone to understand, is that when you are performing this segment of the ritual, and you are blessing the contents of the chalice or blessing the cakes, and you are then partaking of it, you are taking of the blessings of the god, the goddess. So make sure that your words reflect that intention. God and goddess, Lord and Lady, shine down upon this chalice and grant it your blessings, that all who partake of this chalice may be blessed and be able to receive internally the blessings that you have given. Something like that. Make some sort of intention about what you're doing. Magic and ritual is all about intention. What is your intention? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And do it. Don't just go through the motions without any understanding of what you're doing. Focus on the intention, make affirmations, make incantations, read verbal, speak, in order to do that. Now, after the blessing of the chalice, of course, comes the part of the ritual where you will give thanks to the gods. You will give thanks to the ancestors. Of course, now you've already made the offerings to the gods, to the ancestors, to whatever deity you may have needed to invoke. Now you are thanking them officially, and what I do in our temple is after I've thanked them, I extinguish the candles that are sitting in front of the images as a way to, again, as a visual representation of their having left. In that case. So that's obviously the next logical step. And then, of course, the next step after that would be to thank and bid farewell to the quarters, going again in the opposite direction of counterclockwise. You go counterclockwise around the space, and you stop at each of the quarters, and you thank them, and you say, "Thank you so much, bye-bye." Again, the purpose of that is to not only thank the energies and thank them for the blessings and the guidance and everything that's been given, but also to understand that we are not that we're deconstructing the cosmos, but that we are coming back into the mundane, everyday reality. And so by thanking them, and what I like to say is, I don't say, "Hey, thanks, bye." No, I don't say that. What I say generally in the rituals that I lead is I say, thank you for being here, and thank you for bearing witness to this ritual. I ask that, you leave if you have to, but stay if you are able to continually bring blessings and guidance into our lives. That's normally what I say as a thanks, because I'm not dismissing these energies out of my life. I understand that these energies are still there, even if the element of fire, the element of air, water, or earth, just because we are sending them away in the circle doesn't mean they're no longer around in our lives. So I never officially dismiss anything. I never send anything away, because they're always going to be there, And I'd like for them always to be there to bring continued blessings and continued, you know, good fortune and things of that nature. So I never officially tell anything to go away. So that's kind of my personal philosophy on that as well. Um, and then finally, of course, after that, um, the quarters have been thanked, then the circle has, you know, can be opened. And of course, again, you go in the opposite direction, you go counterclockwise to open the magic circle. Now, again, when performing these, it might sound, you know, in the 20 minutes that I've explained this, it might sound very, you know, infantile, very simple, very silly. But understand that these are profound practices that require dedication, that require study, that require most of all practice. Practice to be able to make sure that you can do them carefully, mindfully. And so for me, that's the whole purpose of the devotion ritual that I've made videos on in the past, is because it's meant to be a meditation. A meditation of going through the motions, but also of doing all of these different things in the correct manner and understanding at the same time why you're doing them. It's not easy. It's not easy. Get up, perform the ritual or a ritual, any ritual yourself, and you'll see how difficult it is to keep the visualizations in your mind while you're speaking the proper words, while you're moving in the proper way, in the proper direction, with the proper gestures and the proper mannerisms. It's not easy to do that. It takes practice, it takes dedication, it takes mindfulness, and it takes a deep level of understanding. And that, of course, is why I'm trying to perform, you know, this video today, is to let everybody know a little bit about, you know, these rituals and why we do the things that we do. When we create sacred space, we are clearing away the old. We are making way for the new. We are getting rid of all of the negatively charged energies, raising the vibration in the ritual space. We are cleansing ourselves and our ritual space of all impurities, and we are moving forward with a clean slate to create a special event, which is the magic, the ritual, whatever it is we're doing. So it's really important that when we're casting the magic circle, when we're creating the sacred space, that we understand that this is the beginning, this is our intention, and cleansing and clearing is our intention. When we cast the magic circle, we are, again, reenacting the creation of the cosmos. We are understanding that this is the sort of the beginning, the origin of our ritual, but it's also the recreation of the origin. By closing the magic circle, by drawing the magic circle, and closing it as one unit, we understand through that practice that the divine is made of one energy, and we are reenacting the sort of origin of the universe when the universe was one single object before the Big Bang, before the great explosion that led to the creation of our universe. We are casting the magic circle and understanding that that is the beginning of the origin of the universe. Once we have done that, of course, then we, as I said previously, we call the quarters. And by calling the quarters again, we are recreating the cosmos with air, with fire, with water, with earth. We are calling these energies into our circle. We are calling the attributes that are represented by these entities, these energies, into our circle. Now, in my practice, I don't necessarily consider the elements to be gods per se. I consider them to be almost like elemental archetypes. I guess you could use the term elementals, which are these sort of singular energetic imprints that represent all of the aspects of that element. So when I'm invoking each of the quarters, I'm calling in the associations of each of the elements and asking for those blessings. So first was the casting of the circle, which was the 1. Then the honoring of the quarters as expressions of the 1 in physical form, recreating the universe. And when we go to each direction, we are asking for the blessings of each of the elements from those directions. Now, when we are invoking the ancestors, for those of us that ascribe to ancestor worship, we are understanding that without the ancestors and without their previous knowledge, without their previous experience, without their previous lives, we would not be here. So not only are we honoring the ancestors of our family or of our spiritual tradition, we're honoring all ancestors that have ever went before us. And then, of course, calling the god and goddess. We try to do our best to visualize the actual arrival of the god and the goddess in as much detail as possible, entering into the physical space, because that is how these energies are going to be invited in and are going to enter into the space. So again, the words aren't always going to make a difference, but the visualization and the understanding and the words that we use which evoke those feelings within us that help us to reach out and pull it in, that's what's important. So, understand all of that. Personally, in my temple, what I like to do is I like to ring the bell every time I change from one rite to another. Not only does it help to keep the energy clean and crisp and clear, but it also has the opportunity to segment my practice a little bit more, which I really enjoy as well. Now, obviously, this has all been very conceptual, and we haven't really gone into much detail in specifics in terms of how exactly the rituals performed, or each segment of the rituals performed. I don't want to get into too much of that because it's so readily available in many, many, many different texts. So I don't want to go too much into detail about that, but I hope that by giving you this video, I've gone into a little bit more detail for you that has given you a different sort of understanding of the ritual, why we perform the ritual, and how we can better be more effective when performing the ritual for ourselves and for others, or with others, so that we can be fully engaged and we're not just going through the motions, because that is the death knell of any sort of ritual or any sort of commemorative activity. You can't just go through the motions. So please be aware of that. If anyone has any questions, or there's any specific things they'd like me to discuss or to explain or to share, please don't hesitate to message me or comment on the video. Until next time, signing off for now.